Okay, so we are going to continue with chapter 4. We're going to try to get through this chapter really quickly because we got to get a move on with our material. Chapter 4 is all about affirming collective rights. So again, which three groups of people have collective rights? Let's raise our hand. Okay. What was one group? Indigenous peoples, Aboriginals. We already heard the other two. Anglophones and Francophones, right? Okay, so just a little blurb about the numbered treaties. I don't know how to get all this extra stuff to go with. It's kind of annoying. So the numbered treaties are legal documents created between. You're all done your test.
Yeah, it was really easy.
Famous last words. The treaties are legal documents between First Nations, various tribes, and the Canadian government. They're signed between 1871 and 1921. The government thought the treaties would help to assimilate First Nation peoples, or may have been utilized through that, right? Particularly when we look at the implementation of the residential schools as well. It's believed that for many First Nations people, treaties were oral agreements that discussed the sharing of the land. It's commonly believed that European people thought that it was basically like giving the land away. Okay. I feel like I've spoken enough on that topic already. Here you can see a kind of color-coded map of the treaties. So some of the older ones are on the eastern side of the country, and as you get further and further west, it's more recent. So our last one was Treaty 11, 1921, which is kind of in Northwest Territories. Anyone know what treaty we reside in? Treaty number 6. Right? Okay, but in Alberta, they have Treaty 7, Treaty 6, Treaty 8, a bit of Treaty 10, and a bit of Treaty 4 land as well. Okay, a lot of treaties here. Okay. What's up? And this is just kind of specifying where the treaties were signed for Alberta. I think this is in your notes as well. Yeah, so just some main points there for Indian agents if you want to skim through that sheet as well as we're going along. Your handout, you should all have that. So much reserve land was lost. Or first of all, like we already explained that many Indigenous people were nomadic, so they didn't necessarily have specific areas that they just stayed in. But with the creation of treaties, a lot of if Indigenous people wanted rights, if they wanted the agreement to that treaty, from my understanding, they had to stay on their reserve land, which is a lot smaller than just roaming around wherever you want, right? Indian agents were hired by the Department of Indian Affairs, which was created in the 1880s. They controlled a number of different bands and reserves within a geographical boundary. So one agency might oversee multiple reserves. Initially, their role was to ensure social control and social transformation of First Nations groups. Indian agents had the power to recommend a chief be removed from council, power to enforce attendance at residential schools, enforce leaving and entering the reserve, which included moving, allow cultural and spiritual practices, define who is in need of rations, and act as a justice of the peace in dealing with legal matters. So Indian agents had a lot of influence and control over the lives of many Indigenous peoples and were kind of the liaison for what was going on at the reserves. So Treaty 6, there's 50 nations signed this treaty, including the Cree Saulteaux. I think that's how you say it, Saulteaux. Saulteaux? Anyone know?
I think it's Saulteaux.
Okay, I've heard Saulteaux as well. I always thought it was Saulteaux, but it could be different. Nakota and Dene peoples. At the original signing, approximately 2,000 First Nations people came to witness this event. Some of the things they agreed upon was that a medicine chest would be maintained by the Indian agent for the use of the band. Assistance could be provided in times of famine and pestilence. And once bands had been surveyed, the treaty signatories would receive a supplement of $1,000 per year to assist the cultivation of the land for the first 3 years. So a lot of what they're signing on was for medicine. Any guesses why they would have wanted medicine? What was going on for many Indigenous First Nations people during cultural contact?
Smallpox.
Smallpox is believed that wiped out maybe 70 to 90% of their population.
Was tuberculosis one of them?
Tuberculosis is probably a little bit later on, so maybe in the late 1800s, 1900s, they might.
Is that whatever the ones that want Newfoundland would come by?
Say that again?
The First Nations that were on the one tribe that was in Newfoundland, I think, was that what they were like wiped out by?
I'm not sure if any tribe was completely wiped out by tuberculosis, but if you're referring to the, what is their group name? If you study them in grade 10, there's a particular group that lived out in the Maritimes. They were actually, it's believed they were kind of genocided.
The
So they're just killed.
Beatuck?
The Beatuck, yeah. Yeah. Here's a little photo for Treaty 6, I think some sort of celebration or re-signing maybe. Presenting a medal. So Treaty 7, a little bit of information on here. Prior to the signing, smallpox epidemics were killing communities. Buffalo was starting to diminish due to increased competition from Cree and Métis hunters, as well as the mass slaughter of the buffalo on the prairies by non-Indigenous groups to make room for railroad and settlement. There's some information on when and where it was signed, but there were 4,000 First Nations people present to witness the negotiations and signing. This treaty did not include the medicine chest clause, the famine clause, and assisting with cultivation. Treaty 7 signatories wish to concentrate their agricultural efforts on ranching. With this in mind, the treaty commissioners agreed to reduce the amount of agricultural implements and seed stock in exchange for an increased number of cattle, with an exception for some bands who wanted to focus on farming. Okay. So these groups chose to raise cattle instead of just farming and growing plants, which might have been the next closest thing to eating bison or buffalo meat. Yeah. Did you check in at the office? Here, I have 2 handouts for you. Another significant difference from Treaty 6 is that Treaty 7 states that the Crown will pay for teachers' salary instead of the maintenance of school buildings. Instead of promising schools on reserve, the only guarantee is that the government will pay for the salary of teachers. Okay. School weight. It also tells you which groups signed that. Okay. Treaty 8 was signed in 1899. There was additional areas, over 840,000 square kilometers of land was set aside, which is the largest land area covered by a numbered treaty. Okay, so part of signing Treaty 8 was, as people are moving and settling out west, they start finding valuable resources, particularly gold. I know in American history and American colonialism, when they found gold anywhere, it was kind of bad news for any Indigenous group living there. I don't know how bad it got in Canada, but the Klondike Gold Rush was what was going on in the north of Canada. The terms of implementation of Treaty 8 differ. Because they're more northern locations, some of these clauses mean long-lasting consequences for the governance and people of that area. Primary addition in Treaty 8 was that there were provisions for individuals who chose to live outside the band, known as lands in severalty. I'm not entirely sure how to say that word. These individuals would receive 160 acres. This was a response to the fact that populations were not as concentrated in the north. Farm stock and implements and a suit of clothing for headmen every 3rd year was a unique clause for Treaty 8. Okay? So for these groups, because they're more spread out, ownership of land or having land is much more important to them. we'll kind of skip over the rest of this document and we'll go to some notes.